Okay, guys, welcome back. This is our last chapter, Capitalism and Culture, a New Phase in Global Interaction, since 1945. The last chapter of any history textbook always presents challenges for a teacher. In some ways, the events described, they're so recent, they don't even seem like history. But this chapter provides a strong opportunity for you as students to apply the major themes and historical thinking skills of the course, which remain as important at the end as they were at the beginning. Globalization is a major focal point for this last chapter. Through global connections have been a focus of the AP World History course, even since the opening chapters. And in this last chapter, a broad review of global trade patterns since the classical age may help you better understand the periodization of history. I'm thinking about describing the major transformations in technology and culture that may have come through globalization within even your lifetime. I believe the snapshot, I think it's page 1145 in your book, provides a way for evaluating global development and inequality. And the qualitative data here provides a range of comparative issues, but it might even be more valuable to consider the continuities and changes of these types of statistics over time. Chronological based data can be found all over the web. You just have to search for it. And transregional organizations are described to an even greater extent in this last chapter. You should be able to describe the role and function of groups such as the World Trade Organization and really analyze the differing interpretations of their role in the modern economy. And this chapter analyzes changing gender roles and global feminism in some detail, and also think about analyzing how the responses to changing gender roles and feminism differ from one area to another. And how do the feminist movements of the recent past compare to the earlier movements for women's rights? So first, let's look at this beautiful picture of the planet Earth. I see the moon in the background, in the upper right-hand corner, North and South American continents, and large parts of the Pacific Ocean. Canada is covered in clouds. There are also cloud formations over the North American Pacific coast, and we also see clouds around the South Pacific toward the South Pole. Now, what technologies made this photograph possible? Well, this image probably comes from a satellite, as most of you know, and it wouldn't have been possible without the rocket technologies that have enabled human beings to propel loads into stable positions in orbit. And what was novel or new about this type of imagery in the latter 20th century? Well, all previous images of the world have been maps drawn by man, and those always serve distinct political purposes: to identify spheres of influence, locate natural resources, plan military strategies, and so on. But this image showed none of those features: no boundaries, no labels, no markings. Now, how did this type of image help propel new political trends? Well, I'd stress the overarching unity of all things living on Earth, and it may have helped foster a global approach to political, economic, and even environmental challenges. All right. Now, let's start with the transformation of the world economy. Okay, the discussion of Ken and Barbie, those show the power of global commerce today. But as always, shows a reaction to the values portrayed in Ken and Barbie elsewhere in the world. Like, for example, Iran. Iran created new dolls, Sarah and Dara, that displayed Iranian Muslim values and practices. But the Sarah Dara dolls and the Ken and Barbie dolls were all made in China. And throughout the 20th century, a dense web of political relationships, economic transactions, and cultural influences increasingly bound the world together. By the 1990s, this process of accelerating engagement was known as globalization, and it has a long history upon which the 20th century globalization was built. And the pace of globalization increased rapidly and dramatically after World War II. All right. Most commonly, globalization refers to international economic transactions, but it also has come to seem inevitable to many since the 1950s. Global economic linkages contracted significantly in the first half of the 20th century, especially between the two world wars, right, the Great Depression. And many of those capitalist winners of World War II were determined not to let that happen again, not to repeat the Great Depression. And that led to, for example, the Bretton Woods agreements in 1944, and technology has also helped accelerate economic globalization. Now, that Bretton Woods agreement, that was a system of managing funds and money that was established that established the rules for commercial and financial relationships between lots of different countries, the United States, Canada, countries in Western Europe, Australia, and even Japan. Now, in the 1970s, there's a major capitalist countries that dropped many controls on economic activity and increasingly viewed the world as a single market. So this approach was known as neoliberalism. It favored reduction of tariffs, free global movement of capital, a mobile and temporary workforce, privatization of state enterprises, less government regulation of the economy, and tax and spending cuts. So this neoliberalism was imposed on many poor countries as a condition for giving them loans. And the breakdown of communist state-controlled economies furthered this process. Let's talk about reglobalization. All right, global economic transactions weakened dramatically after World War II. World trade skyrocketed from $57 billion in 1947 to over $16 trillion in 2009. I mean, many companies market goods around the world as opposed to just certain markets. Money became highly mobile globally. For example, the foreign direct investment, especially after 1960, as well as short-term investment in foreign currencies and stocks. International credit cards, which allowed for easy transfer of money to other countries. Like, for example, in 2012, MasterCard was accepted at 33 million businesses, and that's in over 220 countries or territories worldwide. So this is an unprecedented growth in world trade. And the flow of money around the world is a major part of this history. Money moves as investments in industrial projects in other countries, capital that can be loaned to various large and small borrowers and others. It can serve as credit for individuals, like the rise of credit cards, like I just mentioned. And those transnational corporations, the world economy is increasingly dominated by these businesses that are located in multiple nation states and sell their products in markets around the world. 51 of the top 100 economic entities in the world are not nation states, but TNCs, or transnational corporations. So, and they're central to this process, and they're hugely global that operate in many countries simultaneously. And you got to think, this is new patterns of human migration. So in addition to the movement of money, people are moving around the world in greater and greater numbers. And we see push factors like wars, conflict, ethnic cleansing. Syria is a great example of that. Pull factors like higher wages, promise of employment, economic opportunities, freedoms, security, safety. And many of these workers, they came in large numbers, both laborers and professionals, and they've moved all over the world from poor countries to richer countries. Millions more people have sought refuge in the West from oppression or civil war at home, and others migrate from developing to industrialized countries, known as labor migrants. About 20 million came to the United States alone between 1971 and 2010. Those are significant numbers. Okay, and I think this map is great because it shows you foreign investments. So you can see in millions, so 200,000 millions. Obviously, that's a significant amount of money that's been invested in. Here we go. The United States. You get a little bit less than that in Western Europe, and then you see these various little spots. Those are different countries and different businesses. Significant jump here in Brazil, as well as foreign investment in China. Okay, growth, instability, and inequality. So economic globalization accompanied and maybe helped generate the greatest economic growth spurt in world history. It's led to immense creation of wealth. Life expectancies rose nearly everywhere. Infant mortality declined. Literacy rates increased. And there's been a great decline in poverty. But this unprecedented growth has happened. But what about stability? That's a very important question. While the volume of trade in the world has generated great wealth, the cycles of boom and bust have left many people around the world feeling maybe rather vulnerable. A decrease in demand for something in Europe can lead to large-scale unemployment in an African mine or a Southeast Asian factory. And a jump in the price of petroleum can decrease production around the world. Well, the New World economy experienced a series of crises, most recently in 2008. There's a massive chasm that's developed between rich industrialized countries and everyone else. The ratio between the income of the top and the bottom 20% of the world's population was 3 to 1. In 1820, it was 86 to 1 in 1991. So there's great disparity that has shaped almost everyone's life chances, basically. So, and there have been growing disparities that have become a source of conflict between the richer global north and the developing global south. And that tension over trade rules and terms of foreign aid has been there. And the growing disparities between the developing countries made collective action rather more difficult. And the growing economic inequality within the individual states for both the rich and the poor are also an issue. The United States lost millions of manufacturing jobs, forcing factory workers into lower-paying jobs, while others prospered in high-tech industries. Northern Mexico, with links to the United States, became much more prosperous than southern Mexico, for example. And in China, urban income by 2000 was 3 times that of rural income. And there was a growing popular movement against globalization that emerged in the 1990s. That involves people from both rich and poor countries. And they argue that free trade, market-driven corporate globalization lowered labor standards, encouraged ecological destruction, ignored human rights and local cultures, and it also enhanced global inequality. And that attracted global attention with massive protests at the World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle that was held in 1999. And by 2001, there's an alternative globalization activist that created the World Social Forum to coordinate strategy and share their experiences. So we talked about unprecedented growth, but what about stability? And then there's that other question, unprecedented growth, but what about social justice? While the volume of trade in the world has generated great wealth, it's also not been shared equally. So, and this is true internationally, right? The global north enjoys most of the benefits at the expense of the global south. And domestically, as certain regions or economic sectors in a nation state might see rewards while others suffer. So there have been anti-globalization movements, and faced with these questions, the alternative critique of globalization has developed that both challenges the assumptions of neoliberalism and the status quo and urges more equitable distribution of the world's wealth. All right, let's talk about globalization and an American empire. So for many, opposition to corporate free trade globalization means opposition to growing U.S. power and influence in the world. And this is often seen as an American empire. Most Americans deny that America is an empire, perhaps best described as an informal empire, like those exercised by Europeans in China and the Middle East in the 19th century. So how central is the United States to globalization? This is a hotly debated question, especially now as the global power of the United States seems to be in decline. Does it make sense to speak of an American empire? Most Americans would deny that, but societies around the world have been on the receiving end of American power, and their perspective is different. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War left the United States without any equivalent power in opposition. And the United States was able to act unilaterally against Afghanistan and Iraq after being attacked by Islamic militants on September 11th in 2001. An establishment of a lasting peace seemed more elusive. So the United States is in a new global struggle to contain or eliminate Islamic terrorism. And obviously that's a large part of world concern, especially with groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. In September 11, 2001, and the subsequent wars thereafter, America became the sole superpower, and the United States unleashed its military might on Afghanistan and Iraq and non-state-based terrorist groups, and that's been significant in the 21st century. But some see a decline in America's economic power. Since the 1980s, there's been a steady decline in the United States' relative economic position in the world, and in 2008, the United States enjoyed only 8.1% of the world's merchandise exports. So the U.S. has faced growing international economic competition since the 80s. The share of overall world production, about 50% in 1945, down to 20% in the 1980s. And this is a sharp reversal of U.S. trade balance. Imports now far exceed its exports. Now, the armed struggle against the U.S. And intervention in Vietnam and Cuba and Iraq is also important to note. During the Cold War, some states turned toward the USSR to limit U.S. influence. France even withdrew from NATO in 1967. An intense dislike of American cultural imperialism still exists in many parts of these worlds. So we see this resistance to an American empire. In nation states around the world, from Vietnam to Cuba, there have been efforts to resist the American quote-unquote empire. And within the United States, there have been serious critiques stemming from the Civil Rights Movement and the anti-Vietnam campaigns. And by 2000, a widespread opposition to also U.S. international politics and policies. And the global exercise of American power has also caused controversy within the United States. Like I said, there's the Vietnam War that split the country, probably worse than anything else since the Civil War, and the U.S. invasion of Iraq provoked similar protests and controversies as well. Okay, U.S. bases and interventions abroad, in the military face of the American empire. So these in green are countries that house U.S. military bases as of the early 21st century. And you can see there are a lot. Around the world. And since 1950, we see the U.S. military and CIA interventions with all these little red spots right here. Right? That's a significant number. And I think this is fantastic to really see the economic and cultural might of the American empire. Global McDonald's. You can see the number of McDonald's restaurants by country as of 2003. More than 10,000 in the United States. They're nearly, what is that? Probably close to, anywhere from 2,000 to nearly 10,000 in Japan. Same as that of Western Europe, all over. So I think that's a great visual that shows the might of the American empire and their economic influence. All right, that's the end of section 1. I will see you guys again for the globalization of liberation, and we'll focus on feminism. See you next time.